Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Gero. I don't have the talk, I'm just introducing, and I thought I'm introducing another talk right now, which is wrong. I'm introducing Nadia El-Imam, who's like an entrepreneur from Sweden and mainly living, working somewhere in the world, based in Brussels, I guess, and what I've heard about. And yeah, right now she's giving like a talk about some edge riders, like an NGO, focused on on some kind of different economics, something like that. I don't really know so much about it, but I think she will explain it right now, hopefully.
I think it's a very good explanation. It's generally how people explain what Edge Riders is and does, even those of us who have been involved in founding it. What Edge Riders is a community of around 2,300 people in more than 40 countries. We coordinate and collaborate through an online platform, an open source platform, and social media accounts. And the thing that the members have in common is that we're experimenting with alternative responses to systemic crises. So I'm going to tell you many things, but basically this is, if you take anything from this talk, I think this is what we do. We try to bridge the gap between who we are and where we would like to be. So, I'll tell you a little story to begin with. In the 6th century, a nobleman from Murcia called Benedict fled the Roman capital, disgusted by its corruption. He went on to set up a monastery based on values of service to community and work as an ennobling activity, work as something that raises you up somehow. It generated a number of really important innovations, like the scriptoria, for preserving knowledge as the Roman Empire was burning down. It also had massive impact. It scaled really well. In the context of medieval Christendom, it became global. You had monasteries all the way from Ireland to Bohemia. And it's still up and running 15 centuries later today. So in terms of long-lasting, impactful institutions, I think few institutions could claim to have had the same impact and durability as the Benedictine monasteries. And all of this with no central command, just a protocol to harmonize behaviors between monks as they lived together in a monastery. The unMonastery is a kind of residency program for social innovators, hackers, artists, makers, and it's more than just an idea. We've been prototyping it for over a year in a small city in southern Italy. Actually, it's one of the oldest civilizations, like settlements, human settlements around. It's been inhabited continuously for over 9,000 years. And it's based on, what it does is it takes some of the principles that made the monastic orders, Western monasticism, so successful, and tries to redeploy it in a new way in service of a community. Two main features. The first is that the unMonastery is explicitly at the service of the local hosting community. So in the city of Matera, we had participatory workshops with residents in the city where we asked them, what are the issues and challenges and problems that you care about deeply, that matter to you? Things like insufficient technical education for children, or waste management infrastructure that isn't really working very well. And we did open calls on the internet, inviting people to submit proposals for how they would approach this problem. Doesn't need to be a finished solution, just a starting point. And then an assessment of is this person going to be able to make some progress towards addressing it together with people in the local community? The second is that it is not based on the model of the corporation, not even the not-for-profit corporation. The unMonastery derives its sustainability by producing things that are deemed to be beautiful, intelligent, and helpful as perceived by the local community. The idea is that the local community then supports its unMonastery. And with the one in Matera, we've had people contribute materials, electricity, as even a local biscuit manufacturer donates biscuits to this one. And so, back to where we started. So, we know we have, just a growing number of systemic crises, social, ecological, economic, and political. And we know we need to do things differently. People who experiment with alternative responses to these crises exist at the edges. They often act far outside the mainstream. The people and the organizations with the resources and the legitimacy to address many of these challenges live in the center. The center, but the edges are messy and they're stormy and there are no good maps to the edges. So the center, to try to understand what's going on at the edges, asks organizations like the big consultancies, the McKinseys, etc., to try to help them figure out what to do and what's happening outside the mainstream. The problem is that those organizations live in the center, just like the organizations they're supposedly trying to help. And this is the other challenge. I think this cartoon illustrates really, really well the experience of many of us who are doing things in new ways or doing old things in new contexts. We say we want innovation, our societies say we want innovation, but when we're pushed to try things in new ways, a lot of times it's very, very hard, or in worst cases, the system attacks. Okay. And basically what we see a lot of the actors in the center doing is they're looking in that white quadrant. They're looking at what is known and what is visible already, what is highly probable to happen. The problem is that a lot of innovation happens in the red quarters, where you don't see and you don't understand and you don't even necessarily know which questions to ask. And we know that this has an impact because this is the way fringe agents, what we refer to as edge riders, those who walk that thin line where you're trying something and it can go terribly well or terribly badly, we know that those agents are important because that's where we've traditionally seen change coming from. An example is that at one point in time, one person, one vote was a radical idea. It was unimaginable. It is now the norm. And so what Edge Riders does is we do nothing but look in weird directions. We ask each other, how are you managing your life? How are you managing to make a living? How are you managing to care for yourself and for others? How are you building and taking care of commons? How are you managing your learning journey? And we share our strategies with each other, hopefully helping each other maybe avoid some of the costly mistakes that some of us have done previously. But ultimately, it's about collaborating and finding new ways to support each other. And when you ask, you come across some crazy stuff. So this picture is from a neighborhood in Cairo called Al-Mutamedia. And this is in 2011, when the security apparatus was taking a beating in Tahrir Square. This informal settlement decided they were sick and tired of waiting to get access to the main ring road. So they collected around £1 million Egyptian pounds, and they literally hacked one of the busiest roads in one of the busiest cities. To give you an idea, this ring road is 20 meters above ground. They built 4 exits out of this ring road. They collected the money, they got the equipment, they got vests so they looked like official road workers, and they just went for it. Okay, and when they were done, they invited the chief of police over, and they took a photo with him smiling, you know. Access it. So they built exits so that they could actually access this very important road. And incidentally, it turns out that it cost them 25% of what it would have cost the government to do the same thing, and it fulfilled all the official requirements. This is Elf. Some of you might know him. Elf threw away his money and his official papers 4 years ago and has been living entirely moneyless. And he doesn't do this because he's crazy. He doesn't do it because he has to. He does it because he believes a lot of our social problems come from the fact that we reduce human interactions to transactions. So by putting himself out there, he discovers needs that he can help solve. He's a software developer that he can help solve. Maybe there are logistical problems or problems of coordination. This is another member of the community, Alessia, from southern Italy, where they have a lot of problems with organized crime and the mafia demanding extortion, like protection money, racketeering from shop owners. So they built the equivalent of a fair trade label for companies, for local businesses that refuse to pay protection money. It's called addio pizzo, and in Sicilian slang, addio is slang for goodbye, and pizzo is the name of the protection money. And they show that if you step forward this way, consumers can choose to support the businesses that don't give in to racketeering, and they show that nothing happens to you if you do it. And this brings me to the third example, which is tied to the big challenge, as I see it, or one of the big challenges. So, you know, we've seen, you know, I graduated just as the major financial meltdown was beginning to happen. And money, which is supposed to be a glue, a kind of lubricator that enables you to interact with people that you don't know to get things done, it's supposed to be something that facilitates connecting needs with you know, opportunities or skills. But we saw with the financial crisis that it suddenly becomes a huge obstacle. It's not like people suddenly stop being able to do things or suddenly stop needing things done, but somehow money doesn't work. And if you can't access capital, the whole thing jams up. So a member of a community built a network bartering algorithm to enable people to work together moneyless, but still keeping track of who did what for whom. Problem with bartering is if it's one-on-one, unless the needs correspond exactly, there isn't a match. So bartering is when we exchange without money. You have 2 chickens, I have a cow, I want this, you want this, we exchange. Problem is that if they don't correspond exactly, right? However, if you do this at the level of thousands, hundreds of thousands, cities, countries, and you have an algorithm to close the circle, it's possible that it actually might work. Yes, and we're prototyping it with our own projects. It's called MakerFox. And so, one of the things that we've come across is that any time we want to propose novel solutions or political changes that have social implications or societal implications, we always come up against a particular obstacle, which is the gap between the need to make a living and, you know, the needs that we are trying to address. And no matter how we try to get around it, if we don't have proposals that offer new ways of addressing or bridging this gap, we're stuck. the other issue we see is that, as I said earlier, when society pushes you to do new things or things in new ways, because the old channels, like the channels that were available to our parents, get a degree and it's all sorted out, your life is taken care of, no problem, are closed, the system attacks. This needs no further introduction. And so, it's captured, it's managed to capture the international imagination somehow. This is from an American paper, and where you had journalists come into the prototype that we were running in Italy and writes about it. And it's starting to become a word and a term, edge riders and the unMonastery. So what is it we need, really? What is it we build, and how do we make this work? So we do need action, but we also need reflection. And we need them to be happening in the same space. We need digital, social, cultural, and physical infrastructure to support new ways of doing things. The way EdgeWriters does it is in 2 layers. So we have the community, we have an open source collaboration platform and social media accounts. We have events like community meetings, kind of like this one, which are determined and designed by the participants themselves, what do we need, etc. We do things like harmonious hackathons, where people show up with existing projects, social good projects that they need help with. They can't afford to hire developers or designers, and people show up. My issue with a lot of hackathons was that you'd show up, and half the time you were trying to figure out which project you're going to work on, and the other, So we do a lot of coordination so that people come. We're making the best use of our limited time with each other and actually putting our work and time where it matters. And projects. So we host projects, and we have a techno-social support system where we try to get people to work across projects, collaborate with each other's projects. And collaboration is really, really hard. It's really hard. So, and we often think of, when we talk about collaboration platforms, we tend to focus too much on the technical details, but not on the social protocols, social norms, culture of trust, all of these things. And these are things that we pay a lot of attention to. Now, this is a huge amount of work. Just maintaining a social networking, a social platform, is a lot of work. And so the way we do this is not by applying for funding, for many, many reasons. We want to be independent, and we want to, I guess, in a way, outcompete what's there on the market and prove that it can be done. So we set up a not-for-profit company to support the community. And there are 3 things that it's supposed to do. It's supposed to, and it does, it's supposed to increase through the projects that come in from organizations like the UNDP or UNESCO or even commercial actors, you get goals and focus. You get something that needs to be done, and you get a source of revenue. So it generates paid work for the community members. It also gets people to learn to work with each other, because something has to be delivered and somebody cares about what's delivered. And it increases this, I hate this term, but social capital. So that, people are interacting with lots of people whom they otherwise would not interact with, inside and outside and around organizations, which I think is part of what we need. So how we're doing is we're starting to create work opportunities. We're getting projects realized, like the unMonastery is the one we talk about a lot, because it's on a different scale. It's like people moving to a city and living together and interacting with the city administration, etc. But there are also other smaller projects, like the network bartering algorithm. We're now integrating it with the social networking platform and experimenting with building an event, not using money, seeing if we can work this way. Myth building, by telling stories, these kinds of stories of what people are doing in different parts of the world, and stories about how we could be doing things, we start to create, I guess, a kind of modern myth about what is possible. And we take we take ourselves, or we take these things that we want to do from the realm of the unimaginable to the inevitable. If you know your Gramsci, and you know about, the cultural hegemony, you know that certain ideas or certain processes or certain, projects can be rendered impossible because there isn't the culture around them that makes it, real, feel real. But when you see this thing in Egypt, your perception of what is possible shifts. And policy influence. So like with the unMonastery, we're starting to get requests to adopt this in national development plans. And that's the other thing about building things, building infrastructure. When people see something is real, then they're much more likely to go for the novel because they can say, build me one of those. As opposed to if we were to say, hey, we have this idea for this thing, like an old monastic order, but then you'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? But it's there. They can go there, they can check it out, and they see, oh my God, it works. So what's next is, there's an infinite number of things that need to be done. Running like a social platform, a collaboration platform, even technically is quite hard. And if we're to stay independent and free, we need to not be taking in investment. We need to not be, so we need help from the broader open source community to get involved. We want to build partnerships with hacker spaces and maker spaces so that maybe some of them adopt the unMonastery model or some aspects. And we developed unMonastery in a box, the idea being that you can take this thing and you can set it up on top of what you're already doing or completely new in a decentralized way, but still plugged into the international network of these spaces. We need to develop more collaborations with freelancers and small businesses. And we need to convince more organizations to choose our approach, this networked approach where you put out a problem and you have a lot of people solving it in ways that you could not have imagined before. To choose this instead of doing more of the same old safe stuff, which is not really that safe when you think about it. So open consultancy is what we call it, is where organizations will come to us with a problem they have or a challenge. And rather than saying, can you solve it this way, they will say, we need this solved. And what we'll do is we'll involve the broader community and go, let's think about this problem, not deciding what we're going to produce, but letting it go where it's supposed to go. And this generates much more interesting solutions that I think are also more likely to succeed because people are genuinely excited about them. And because most of us are not in anybody's chain of command, it's a loose network, and people only work on the things that they're interested in and believe in. This is a kind of filtering system, so you know that what comes out of it, what is realized, is really, really good, because a lot of people have put work and time into it that would not have if it wasn't credible. And so if you want to help, you can come to the community event, show up at one of the Harmonious hackathons, learn how we build this, learn how you can build it for yourself and with others, learn how we build community and maintain community, and give some of your time to some of the projects that already exist. You can invite hacker spaces and maker spaces to get involved with this scene. You can use the platform and help improve it. And you can connect us with organizations that might want to work this way. And the events are always free of charge, and they're free of charge because you build your ticket. The way you get a ticket is you just build the event with everyone else who's building it. And you're very welcome, and we'd love to see you. That's it. Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nadia. And we just have a mic and give it around.
Could you describe specific differences between the unMonastery and the typical hackerspace?
Is this on? It is on. I think so. The main difference is, I think, that the unMonastery is explicitly, it has a social contract with the community in which it exists. You see? So the approach is you care for the problems that the community around cares about, and you invite people to work together to try to solve some of them. I guess some hacker spaces maybe will have that ethic. I don't know. And the second difference, I think, is that the idea is to have, if I'm going to think really big, an unMonastery in every city in the world, beginning with Europe and then all over, so that you have this ecosystem of people that are working differently. Why? So we're seeing structural unemployment in lots of places in the world. In Sweden, where I'm from, the economy supposedly is going quite well, okay? But for the past 10 years, we've had youth unemployment levels in the 20+%. And in Spain, it's over 50%. In Italy, we have, the labor market is broken. And we think of the market is supposed to be the most efficient way of, allocating resources to address needs. But if people are addressing these needs outside the market, actually many of the initiatives that pop up on EdWriters don't follow a market logic at all. They do things because it's needed. I would like to see the unMonastery as an alternative infrastructure for those of us who want to dedicate our time and our skills towards, if not doing good, at least not hurting other people or the environment.
Yeah, more questions? Yeah.
So you said earlier that there is a conflict between people having to make a living and working in these projects. So how do the people make a living if they are also working a lot of time in these projects? Is there some kind of compensation, and is there some kind of social security that you can provide to the people that are part of this community?
So, there's two ways in which you engage in any initiative. It can be something that you do on volunteer basis and you don't take any responsibility. You just put in a little time here and there, as many of us do in lots of different projects. And there are times when you step in really full time and work on something and you take responsibility for it being delivered. In the one case, no. In the second case, it depends. With the unMonastery, it's like an artist residency program, so the city puts up a bursary of around 400 euros a month. So people come in and that pays for extra expenses. But accommodations are free of charge, and it's a communal living space, so the cost of living is much lower. It's not a complete alternative to what you're already doing, but you can take 1 to 4 months to work on something that matters to you. It's a starting point, Then there are the projects that we do with organizations that are paid, like we did work for UNESCO and the UNDP. Then we give people commercial contracts, and we try to pay people commercial rates, but they're working on projects that are very, very different from what they would be doing with their day job. The intent is to get past a critical threshold where we can get a critical mass aligning those two. You're doing meaningful work and you're having your material needs satisfied. But your material needs also change depending on how you live and what you're doing. I've seen this with myself. I've changed my lifestyle from starting out with this project where my cost of living is much, much lower because my needs change. So it's a lot of different things that happen at the same time, and we don't know. But what's the alternative? We have to try.
More questions in the audience? Yeah.
My first question is, so did you say that people can get paid for some months for living in the unMonastery, from the city or from the unMonastery organization?
So we ran a first prototype, which was the first one we ever did. And we did it in collaboration with the city that wanted to set up the unMonastery there. And they put up a bursary. They were going to do an artist residency program anyway. And we said, hey, so this time the city put it up. But the idea is that in the long run, and you have to do things then with a much longer term perspective. You have to remember, this idea popped up less than 2 years ago, and it's gone from like a conversation on the internet to a physical space. The idea is that either they would, run revenue-generating activity somehow, and each unMonastery would have to come up with its own, depending on what the needs are, or create some kind of symbiotic relationship with the community around, with local farms, etc., etc. So people have weird skills that the labor market doesn't know what to do with yet. We're looking at, can we use those skills in different ways to satisfy everybody's needs?
So in the long run, you aim to run on profit? Like, you're intending to run on profit, like in the long run?
My personal aim is for everybody to be spending their time doing meaningful work and being able to make a comfortable living. Yes.
So I just you're planning that the city at some point in time doesn't need to put in money anymore.
Yeah, and actually, to give you an idea, it was like less than 30. It was around 30,000 euros, and most of that went into restructuring a building that was not being used, as opposed to selling it off or privatizing it. What happens is that an asset that's owned by the city stays in city ownership, its value goes up, and you're using it as a kind of indirect financing for addressing social needs.
Yeah. And some other thing is that do you have like some like a social control units or something? Like if somebody comes and wants to join the unMonastery, you I suppose you give like some trust in advance to the person, that the person is going to really get into it and wanting to do something, and so it's that the persons don't just like get in and live like comfortably and then like after a few months move out and say, well, thanks for all the fish and ciao.
You know that first of all, this is a pretty extreme choice, like moving to some other part of the world and living. So in this unMonastery, everybody slept in the same room. So it's like, except for the snorers, they put the snorers in a separate room. It's not easy. It's very, very hard. So people don't show up unless they're pretty committed. One of the guys is head of digital at the Serpentine Gallery in London. It's not a bunch of freeloaders or hippies. A lot of us actually do have traction, or could have traction in the mainstream economy, but choose otherwise for political reasons or because we see this is not sustainable. This is sending us off the whatever. So the social control is in creating a space that actually only attracts people who are interested in being there. Yeah. And it's the same with the platform. It's completely open. We don't censor or moderate anyone, but you step in, and it's not like a fast medium. It's not like it's not like Facebook. It's not a lot of opinionating. Actually, we have a certain set of rules. Like if you don't like something, you critique it by proposing a better alternative. You can't just whine and complain. It's like, okay, build it better. Or so there are social protocols that harmonize expectations from everybody who's there, and so far it works quite well. And the other thing is, if you build to disincentivize untrustful behavior, you will get a lot of untrustful behavior. If you design assuming trust, you get trust. It's one of these heuristics, you know.
Thank you. Any more questions in the audience? Oh, yeah.
What's the idea behind the very unusual spelling of or definition of the word unMonastery? It's unMonastery. So is there some special story behind that? And you know, having studied the history of monasteries in Europe, they very fast grew into very rich and political organizations and becoming big landowners and taxing all the farming communities all around. How are you going to stop that? Not quite serious.
Okay, so the unMonastery came about when we were sitting in a room, actually at one of the Lotte events, and we were talking about alternative ways of financing social good projects. Because if you want to sell shit that kills people, you know, like crowd control drones or whatever, or cigarettes, it's no problems finding money. Or if you just want to make money, no problem. If you're doing things just to improve the quality of life of people, or to make them happier or feel better about themselves, it's very hard to find progressive money in the system. And we realized there was this infrastructure to support a life of service and work to community that we had in previous centuries, which was the monastic orders. So somebody says, okay, let's build one. We're like, yeah, okay, cool. And then somebody said, but I'm not too into all of, you know, the religion and the no sex and the, you know, can we just skip that? And we said, okay, yeah, let's call it unMonastery, because we keep the stuff that's good, but it's not a monastic order, it's different. And we take what works and we figure out the rest by prototyping it, really. And the other question was about, okay, so the other question was about how do you prevent some of the bad things, the negative consequences that came with the monastic orders. Well, I think for one, when we talk about the unMonastery, we really do have a 200-year perspective. It's not this year, next year. We're saying, how do we design an institution to last 200 years? And we have a lot of these conversations, and we actually go and visit modern-day monasteries. There are posts about this, learning from them and understanding how they work also today, and how we can maybe avoid some of the stuff that we don't really like. But at the end of the day, we design for emergence. It's not centralized command and control. You have a set of social protocols. You have certain ways of coordinating between the monasteries. And then it's up to the people who start the first ones to infuse them with the culture and the rituals that inoculated against that. And at the end of the day, you know, if you walk into a room, you will see that different arrangements of furniture and interiors encourage different kinds of behavior. It's the same thing with how you design any social space. You can put the culture in the walls and in the behaviors between people that lead to certain outcomes, others. But in the end, you don't really know. You try, and maybe in 200 years it will be a bad thing. I don't know, but I think there's something to be said for giving ourselves the space and the permission to experiment. We see stuff is not working, so let's try it differently. We don't know. It might work, it might go horribly wrong, but you can't do anything new and not accept failures as a given. And I think trying to look for certainty in everything we do is a kind of pathology that yes, we will make mistakes, that's fine. We'll learn from them, we'll move on, or not. we'll see. But you can be part of building that, actually. That's the way it works.
Yeah, thank you. There's one more question, I guess.
If you have enough time, so. Oh, fine. How do you make decisions within the unMonastery? Because well, within our party, it's been a really big issue that I think finally crashed the party. That we couldn't like make decision that everyone accepted and well did.
So it's two different things. With Edge Riders, which is the community out of which the unMonastery rose and many other projects rose, it's running code and rough consensus. We don't do town hall meetings with voting, and this is my idea of a fucking nightmare. No way. It's like the way you choose is you engage or you don't engage. Don't like it, build it better. Want something else, vote with your feet. And this is designed to empower people who do things and not those who complain and try to veto. So this is the software, this is the set of social protocols we've developed, and that's what enables things like the unMonastery to happen. Then in the building itself, the people who set up the first one, the prototype, have a lot of experience from having squatted, you know, like one of the un-abbot used to squat 2 million pound houses in Mayfair and run like illegal schools out of them. We've lived in communes, we've a lot of experience organizing our lives where you live closely and you learn. There is an intelligence there's a collective intelligence that goes into the design. And since the design is happening online in an open way, you get a lot of very, very valuable input from people who do similar or comparable things in other parts of the world. There's another collective called Las Indias, who've been doing comparable things, but a completely different structure, completely different decision-making mechanism, and they're in the community. There's another group called Filet Asir, who they came out of the 15 SHM movement in Spain, you know, the Indignados, okay? So some of them are starting to coalesce also into different kinds of working spaces. So we're all finding each other and exchanging practices, and there isn't really a clear boundary between who's inside, who's outside. Everybody's in everybody's projects, left, right, and center. Las Indias is more like they have more of a boundary, but they're in the scene and interacting, and we're, you know. So if you design your protocols so that they empower people who do things and not the complainers and veto makers, power onto you. But consensus decision making doesn't work if you want to get things done. Sorry. Yeah, not for me. Fuck that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think consensus is like some all-pay auction where somebody wins that is just prepared to invest the most time in discussing until everyone says, okay, well, let's do it your way. And yeah, but so if I live in the unMonastery, for example, I want to paint the dormitory where everyone's sleeping in, they just go on and paint the dormitory?
I do it and see what happens.
Oh, fine.
It'll be different, and you have to remember one of the things that we're extremely bad at paying attention to in tech-intensive communities is cultural differences and differences in communication patterns and, you know, emotional differences and, you know. So learning how to interact with each other and being different and equal and being cool with that, it also means being sensitive and adaptable, learning how to read social context and learning how to teach each other to signal what you need and what you don't need in constructive ways. So this is why I always talk about the techno-social. Social is very, very important. Social protocols, and it's hard. I wrote an email yesterday to somebody, and they totally freaked out because I had followed like an Anglo-Germanic communication pattern, and they're like, we're Latino, it doesn't work this way. You can't just be like this and this. And I'm like, fuck yes, okay, yes, I know. I should have paid more attention. And it's exhausting. I'm like, the fucking drama. But this fucking drama, this is this is a key part of who we are. It's beautiful. We're humans. We're complicated. We're difficult. We're messy. We're not machines. And we have to just be cool with that and figure out how to live together.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have more questions? Otherwise, I think the time is nearly up with like an hour, and we should just thank you again, Nadia, for this very good talk. I'm pretty happy about it, and thank you a lot.